The record-breaking migration figures that are set to be released this Thursday are thought to be about 1 million. The Home Secretary has revealed that one major contributor to this figure are the tens of thousands of foreign students bringing their families over with them to the UK. In 2019, approximately 16,000 dependent visas were handed out, but last year it was an enormous 136,000. It seems that the numbers only ever go up. Mrs Braverman has announced that the tightening of migration rules will stop dependents coming with students on their studies. Though universities are concerned this may discourage foreign students from studying in the UK, is it right that a well-earning family should be able to move to the UK on their child's student visa? Well, I'm joined now by the former head of Health and Labour at the Office of National Statistics, Jamie Jenkins. Jamie, thank you very much for joining me. First of all, there was a very interesting report today saying that one of the reasons the figures are so high is because they're more accurate now we've left the European Union and we have an actual count of immigration rather than the estimates that the ONS used to do of European member state nationals. Is that part of the reason for the rise?
I don't think that's going to be part of the reason, Jay. I'll just explain kind of what the ONS used to do. So they would normally be at the ports, the airports, and they would do kind of surveys, random people as they come in, and that would give you an estimate of your kind of migration numbers. And to be frank, that wasn't really fit for purpose for what we've got now. And what they've been doing for several years is looking to move to use more of the administrative data. So that's kind of data that we've got from the NHS, the Department for Work and Pensions, and HMRC, where people obviously are issuing visas to migrants to try and improve things. But you can always get a good check as to how reliable the numbers have been, Jacob, because we have a census every 10 years. And the way the ONS estimate the population is, you get the estimate of the census, then you add on the births, you take off the deaths, and then you add on what you estimate for your migration. Now, when we had the 2021 census, the population wasn't actually that far off what they estimated through the decade. So it probably does suggest that the migration figures weren't too far off. And actually the migration numbers might actually be slightly kind of undercounted over the last decade because of the way the figures came out.
Yes, so the numbers, if they do reach 1 million, are bad, but they're not necessarily as proportionately bad as people are thinking because of the undercounting. But can we be confident that the million figure, if that's what it is now accurate, is done as people come in, they're properly registered, and we know it without having to use estimates, or is it still in part estimated?
Well, there will still be in some part estimations as part of this when you're using all of the kind of the administrative data, but it will be much more robust than what we've had in the past, Jacob. And I think the important thing with the million that you're talking about is the ONS themselves also do population projections, and we're planning on the basis of around 230,000 a year. So 1 million is quite high on that. But the point you've raised, I think, is an important one with the kind of the students, because it was in 2018, 13,000 family members come over. As you rightly said, 136,000 in 2022, a tenfold increase. To put that number into context, that 136,000, now, since 2018, all the Channel migrants that have come over on the boats, every single year, every single month now since they started coming over, only adds up to 92,000. So in 1 year, we've had more from the kind of people coming over with their students than all of the small boat migrants coming over overall.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Jamie. I'm now joined by my panel, journalist and author Michael Crick, and the Conservative MP, Miriam Cates. Miriam, someone has blundered, haven't they? We met David Cameron as we were coming over here this evening.
I've never met him before.
He promised that we'd get migration down to the tens of thousands, and instead we've got it up to 1 million. What have we been doing as Conservatives in the last 13 years?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it? And I think people voted for Brexit with the expectation that migration would come down. Obviously, Brexit has enabled us to control the European side of migration. But, you know, under our noses over the last few years, that migration from the rest of the world has gone up significantly. And I think there are a number of different types of migration, aren't there? But obviously the focus today is on these student visas. And I think everybody appreciates that universities want to be able to offer courses to some of the brightest in the world. But these numbers are just far too high, and we need to bring them down.
But what's the Education Secretary doing? 600,000 student visas being issued. That's not the best and brightest in the world. That's a mass migration scheme.
No, that's right. And it is clearly a pull factor for people from other countries, not just to come over here to study, but to bring their families. And you can understand why they might want to do that. But when we're lacking family houses for our own families, it's clearly not appropriate. And I think we need to decide, what are our universities for? Are they for essentially our own economy, our own nation, our own people, or are they an export?
Michael, is this justifiable? Is it fine? We have 1 million coming in, and if it were a bit more, it wouldn't really matter? Or is this a big political problem?
Well, I do think, as William Hague said in the Times today, we have got to get used to mass migration with global warming, civil war, tyrannical regimes, people finding it easier to travel from one continent to another. I don't think we will ever really see a return to the days of small migration. However, I think 1 million a year, if it was to carry on at that rate, is unmanageable in the short term. And simply in terms of the cost in terms of resources, the pressures on our health service, and the pressures on housing. I mean, 1 million people, you're talking about 500,000 new dwellings, if you assume they live two per dwelling on average. And what have we, I mean, at the very best, we have a target of 300,000. So that means, and what do you think it means for the person on the housing waiting list or the person whose rent's gone up? So in the long term, in the medium term, 1 million a year is unmanageable. But we may have to cope with that in the long term and prepare for it.
Mass migration because of war and famine and so on is not 600,000 students plus their dependents. That's an economic choice that it seems to me the government's made without admitting it to the voters.
Well, a part of this, of course, I mean, I've been involved in university governance on 2 university boards for the last decade, and so I'm familiar with a lot of this. And part of the problem, of course, is that universities have become increasingly dependent on income from foreign students because they can charge a much higher fee than the 9,250, which has been that figure for years and never goes up, and no government dares put it up after the rows about university fees there were years ago. And governments, I think, have got to start putting it up in line with inflation every year. Otherwise, the universities are going to go bankrupt without this reliance on foreign student income. But you say they're not the best and the brightest. Actually, a lot of them are very bright indeed, and a lot of them are brighter than some of our home students. And the fertilisation, the cross-fertilisation of ideas. And in any case, a lot of them go home. I mean, it's not 600,000 people coming here permanently.
I don't know. A lot of them stay on and work and so on.
Well, often they're doing good jobs, though.
Well, but really the question is one of democratic accountability.
Exactly.
That if we'd gone into the 2019 election saying we're going to have 1 million students and 600,000 students, 1 million coming in, that's fine. Voters could have chosen that. But we said the exact opposite. That's what really worries me. So why isn't the government getting a grip and saying, we promised this, we will deliver it?
Well, I think Suella Braverman's making that case very powerfully, and obviously today is a first attempt to put some proper controls on the student visas. And I think Michael's right about the incentives for universities to attract foreign students. They're paying more money, but the taxpayer is losing out. The university gets more money. The taxpayer provides the school places, the accommodation, the doctors, the doctor's time. And I don't think we should accept that actually mass migration is the future. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think it's a proven strategy. And also, whilst it might have been the case until recently that certain parts of the world populations are growing exponentially, that's no longer the case. Only 3% of the world's population now live in countries where birth rates aren't falling. This is a short-term strategy, and it's not one that is democratically accepted and has all sorts of problems with it.
I don't see how you're going to stop mass migration. I don't think the government has got a clue how it's going to stop mass migration. And barges in Rwanda are not the answer. Or they're only the answer in a tiny way, and the Labour Party clearly doesn't know how either.
But Rwanda and barges are dealing with the illegal migration bit. It turns out the illegal migration bit, as Charlie was saying, is trivial. That we could take all the people coming over in small boats, and that's 5% of the total that we're taking legally.
Legal or illegal, that is arguable as to whether it's illegal.
What people expected was an Australian-style point system where we had a lot of choice and very high bar of who came here. We have a point system. The problem is the bar is far too low. And the salary expectation is something like 27,000, which is below the mean salary in this country. So I think the general public expect the bar to be high, that someone who comes here should be a net contributor to our GDP per capita, and that hasn't happened. And I think that's a good place to start.
But the other problem, of course, is that employers can't get enough labour. We see it all the time. You go to a hotel or a restaurant and all sorts of other walks of life. They can't get enough staff, and they are desperate for migrants as well.
For local people in hospitality has gone up, and that's a really important improvement in the standard of living for people who were born here, and is very important. However,